Okay, so we're back with Stanley Carlson-Thies, who's written a book, Free to Serve, Protecting Religious Freedom of Faith-Based Organizations. I wonder, Stanley, if you could just explain to our viewers exactly who this book is written for.
Yeah, so my colleague, co-author, and I, Stephen Monsma, we wrote this especially for the leaders and staff and board members of faith organizations themselves. So, lawyers who work in the religious freedom area, they have a lot of specialized knowledge. They spend a lot of time monitoring. Academics, they know the literature and so on and so on. But often the very organizations themselves, they're in the middle of things. They're putting all their energy into providing services, doing fundraising, making sure their staff is in good shape, and all those kinds of things. And then they kind of hear these stories out there about something happened to some organization. And even if you look at it in the time you have, and then you think, well, that's kind of odd. Maybe it's because that was in Canada, or it's because that was an adoption agency, and after all, we're a school, or maybe it's because they didn't follow the rules, and that's why they got in trouble. So you hear all these stories, and you also know there are people out there kind of fear mongering, and also people who just don't take it seriously enough. So you just don't know how to
Hmm.
evaluate it. So we thought to really write something that would help people in the middle of things put together the puzzle. They've seen some trees. Here's kind of the forest. Here's what it looks like. Here's some of the sources. And then, particularly, here are things that you yourself can do as an organization separately from what the lawyers and the lawmakers are going to do. So, we wanted to empower the organizations with information. A non hysterical view of the seriousness of things, a way to kind of understand what's happening, and then a way to respond to it.
Okay. Now, I must say, while this is US centric, I found that the principles that you are suggesting in your book for leaders of faith based organizations could be something that in any Western democracy that's facing a secular ideological approach towards faith based organizations. And so I found that to be very
Yeah, so
helpful.
I'm glad about that. Yeah.
Now, you talk about in here as a way forward is to look at the concept of principled pluralism.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could just unpack that for us for just a few
Yeah,
minutes.
so it's a hard enough idea in one sense. We put the term principled on there. I think sometimes we called it civic to say this is about the political framework. So there's a view of pluralism that's kind of philosophical, and it's a view that, all truth is equally good or equally irrelevant. All roads lead to God, whatever. That's not what we believe. We believe that as in my case as a evangelical Christian, that there is a truth about life and about our world and about how best to serve people and what kinds of relationships are best and all that.
Hmm.
I think that's true for the real world, but I know other people don't think that's true. They have their own views. So the idea of principled pluralism is how do we, given these different views, allow each other to live by their convictions and not have to kind of strip those convictions off when they enter out into public life together with everybody else. And so the very idea here is that not that truth is irrelevant, but no, it's exactly relevant, and people should be able to live by it, and organizations should be able to live by the convictions they think are true. And then we have to figure out how do we live together with that. So, principled pluralism, I think the first thing we just ask people to do is admit that we don't agree about some pretty fundamental things. And yet, here we,
Now, yeah, no, I did. Now that's an extremely important point because we're not all going to agree, and it would seem to me that part of the reason why people are so against faith-based organizations is that they're upset that that organization doesn't agree with their view
yeah,
or their worldview.
yeah, and sure, that's understandable because they have a worldview that they think is true. But then, of course, so does a faith-based organization, and yet
Mm.
here we are in the same society. So, is there a way we can live together despite those differences of view? And in fact, we figured that out in some pretty fundamental areas. So, Canadians or U.S. citizens who are Buddhists and those who are Catholic have found a way to live together, and
Mhm.
that way to live together, in part, it means you just have to admit that you're not going to convince wants everybody to be Buddhist or Catholic. And so, how do you live together anyway? Well, partly you just kind of have to back off a little bit and say, okay, so then the laws aren't going to be all Catholic or they're not going to be all Buddhist. But is there a way to create within the society where we have both flavors, both very deeply rooted different views, to live together? And yes, it is possible. You can have Buddhist schools. There could be a person who's Buddhist who's engaged in business in a way that's faithful to that, that doesn't require everybody else to follow that, but just runs your own business that way. So it's possible outside of government to have these different points of view and to let them exist. Canada has a long history, actually, in education, for example, of
Hmm.
having, you know, Lutheran in Ontario, Lutheran and Catholic schools, along with secular ones. And that was a deal made at the beginning of Ontario, but it was certainly possible to live together. And people who came out of the Catholic schools didn't say, "Well, we can't live here with, atheists or secular people or Lutherans." So it's possible to have both the principle of unity and diversity. And we just argue in this book, let's be a little more bit more consistent about that. And instead of the secular people saying to the faith people, "Hey, you're crazy, we can't live with you," say, "Well, I think you're crazy, but I can see some good things that you're doing, and let's leave space for that." And the religious people are, of course, going to have to say to the secular people, "I know you don't want to run your things the way we do, but you do it your way, we'll do it our way. And then let's find a way to live together in the middle of that."
So, your idea then is to have all of these various faith based organizations that are going to be uh, living out their own religious views and so forth on a day to day basis
Yeah.
in carrying out whatever the work is. And you mentioned education, health care, and other concerns for the needy. And you're saying, look, let us continue to operate while maintaining our particular religious
Yeah.
view. That's your
Yeah, that's
position.
that's my point of view, and I think that's what's actually diversity. Just imagine when, under the slogan of diversity, people say to the Catholic institution or Seventh Day Adventist or whatever, you can't be crazy like that. You got to let everybody in and serve everybody the way they want to. So
Mm.
basically, you have to become secular and not Catholic or not Seventh Day Adventist. Well, what's the consequence of that? Anybody who then wants to work in a Catholic environment can't find one. And anybody who wants to be served in a pro-life way can't find a doctor or a hospital or clinic because that's been made illegal. That's not diversity. Diversity has to be reflected in institutions and in difference the way people run things and the way they offer things, or else it's not a real diversity. So I just say here, we respect individual conscience. That's great. We also have to respect that individual conscience as it comes to expression in institutions. And then we'll have diverse institutions. People can get served in one place or another place, get employed by one place or another place. And then people will be able to live by conviction and not just having to pretend that their convictions aren't important for their real life in the world.
Okay, great, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Stanley. We will come back yet one more time, and this time we want to talk about how we can be able to continue this principle pluralism. And you have some great suggestions for faith-based organizations. Let's look at them next time.
Okay, super.
Okay.
And I'm going to connect my power so